Bet the board.
What do you mean you don't bet? I mean, I don't bet. You know, I don't gamble. I don't. I never have, and I never will. Yeah, right. I'll bet you $20 I can get you gambling before the end of the day.
You owe me 15 grand, pal.
Pay him. Pay that man his money.
It's the Bet the Board podcast.
God likes me. He really, really likes me.
In the end, I wound up right back where I started. I could still pick winners, and I could still make money for all kinds of people back home. And why mess up a good thing?
Here's Payne Insider and Todd Furman.
Welcome into the Bet the Board podcast, powered by FanDuel Sportsbook. Go West, my friend. It's the Pac-12 season preview. I'm your host, Todd Furman, joined as always by my esteemed colleague and co-host, the one, the only Payne Insider. But before we get into the current landscape of the Pac-12, which won't hold true about 2 years from now, I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, to go to FanDuel.com, use the promo code BetTheBoard, take advantage of your no-sweat bet up to $1,000, whether you want to bet on Major League Baseball, you're looking to try and put your money to work for you in the soon-to-start English Premier League, you're betting NASCAR in conjunction with Stay Green. There are so many different ways that FanDuel has you covered this summer season, even before football gets here for real. Bet the Board Pod, that's your promo code. Take advantage of your no-sweat bet. And Payne, I know you count the minutes, the hours, the days, the weeks, and months until we get to Pac-12 football. But before we get into the 7 teams that we have on tap today, I do have to give you a little bit of credit.
Go ahead.
So every now and again, I wander aimlessly through the streaming world trying to find a hidden gem when it comes to television shows or ways to pass the time during some of the dog days of summer, or what we like to call nuclear winter during sports betting season. And I resisted as long as I possibly could, but I have to give you full marks. I am officially through season 1 of Sons of Anarchy, and it gets 2 thumbs up, 5 stars, whatever rating system you want to try and give it. And my focus may not be on the SEC that we're going to preview next week if I have to try and crush through 3 or 4 more seasons of this show before football season gets here.
Great show.
So
I'm not the kind of guy
here we go
that says I told you so.
No, you wouldn't be that kind. You wouldn't be that
expected.
kind of. You wouldn't be that kind of guy at all in any capacity. Never.
I'm not, and you know this deep down. We've had this conversation, whether it's with sports betting or with this particular instance, a television show. I'm not the I told you so guy. Just not my vibe.
But yes, it does get full marks.
It's expected, though. It's expected. When do I lead you astray, I think, is the better question.
Well, we'll find out by the time we get to the end of this podcast if we're all on the same page. More about that when we eventually get there. But all right, let's kick things off. We got a lot of ground to cover. Like we said, 7 teams. For those Pac-12 enthusiasts, though, only 5 of them actually hail from the Pac-12. I know this is a podcast where fans of the independents we're getting extremely excited about, as we'll get into BYU and Notre Dame as well, 2 teams that have aspirations of finishing inside the top 15. But as far as the Pac-12, we'll start with the Oregon Ducks in the North Division, or what was formerly the North Division, since now we don't have any of those things working in any capacity. Oregon finds themselves as 3-1 shots to win the Pac-12 this year. Their win total sits at 8.5. You do need to lay $1.30 to go over the total at FanDuel Sportsbook. And this is now Dan Lanning's team. He takes over at 36 years old, having trained at the elbow of coaches like Nick Saban, Kirby Smart, and Payne's beloved Mike Norvell. In comes Kenny Dillingham to lead the offense. A lot of excitement there about Bo Nix transferring in, a defense that could be better than advertised, even after losing a top 5 draft pick in Kayvon Thibodeau. When you look at this Oregon team, Payne, so much of spring ball, the emphasis was placed on explosive plays, and they connected on just 10 of over 40 yards all of last season. A lot of that had to deal with the inconsistency of Anthony Brown. Hopefully the quarterback battle puts them in a better position. You see the running back room going to have a little bit of turnover. CJ Verdell off to the NFL. Travis Dye takes his talent down the coast to USC, meaning it's Brian Cardwell's job. Pass catchers remain a big question mark, but when you look at Oregon offensively, is there reason for optimism in Eugene, even if this could be a team without residents in a power conference 2 years from now?
No doubt about it. I mean, I'm a Kenny Dillingham guy, and he gets a chance to run his own offense. I would expect it to be far more vertical than what Oregon ran last season by design and because they've upgraded from Anthony Brown at quarterback. The Mike Norvell, Kenny Dillingham offense is about putting players in position to win their one-on-one matchup. The scheme will get you one-on-ones. Now go win them. And we saw that in the spring game with some monster explosives from really a young but extremely talented receiver group. And it's pretty clear to me that Bo Nix is going to start, despite Dan Lanning saying there's no depth chart right now and everything's a competition heading to fall camp. Bo Nix is Kenny Dillingham's guy. He handpicked him. He recruited him to Auburn. Bo Nix is coming off his best season. And if Kenny Dillingham is in Florida State right now, that's probably where Bo Nix is as well. The other key here is Bo Nix is downgrading the defensive competition he's going to face in the Pac-12. So it would not be at all surprising to me that Bo Nix has his best season ever. And looking at the parts of the field that Bo Nix was best attacking in his best season last year, it was the intermediate and deep areas. And that fits with what Kenny Dillingham wants to do. This is going to shock some people. But Bo Nix graded out the second best intermediate passer among quarterbacks with at least 300 dropbacks last season. Only Bryce Young was better on throws in that 10 to 19 yard window. Oregon should have one of the better offensive lines in front of Bo Nix too, right? It's a veteran group. You have TJ Bass, an elite run blocker, Alex Forsythe, Ryan Walk. That rounds out a nice trio. We know the recruiting of that position is Mario Cristobal's specialty, having been an offensive lineman, so the cupboard was not left bare. You look last year, the Ducks finished second in line yards, 8th in opportunity rate, number 1 in stuff rate allowed. So whichever running back ultimately emerges, and we'll find out pretty soon, right? Sean Dollars is coming back from a serious injury. Byron Caldwell really wasn't that great metrically last season. Whoever the running back is going to have a pretty good offensive line in front of him. I'm really interested to see what Marquise Irving, the 4-star transfer, looks like behind this line. Didn't get to see him in the spring game since he transferred to Oregon about 2 weeks after that game. Receiver group you mentioned being unproven and with little experience, completely agree. And there's lots of national folks calling it a question mark because of that. Personally, I think there's a difference between unproven and not capable. And every single Duck receiver that appears to be a contributor this season is 4 stars or better. Dante Thornton has been all the rave, had a monster spring game. He seems quite versatile where he can take a top off a defense, win some routes one-on-one. Chris Hudson is a burner. Troy Franklin and Seven McGee round out a solid 4. And then you have Chase Code, the UCLA transfer, who has shocked Kenny Dillingham with his dependability. Obviously, you get Georgia out of the chute here. That's not a game you're going to impress in the very first foray of this new system, right? But there's only 3 top 50 defenses according to our projections after the Georgia game. The 8 other defenses Oregon faces have an average projected efficiency rank of 93rd. The way the schedule aligns after Georgia, I think Kenny Dillingham has time to get the offense up to speed before facing, Washington and Utah later in the season, 2 of the top 50 defenses that I mentioned there, Todd. So I think this offense has a chance to perform quite well.
Don't tell Oregon fans they can't do the unthinkable. It was only a season ago they went on the road as 2 touchdown-plus underdogs into Columbus and knocked off Ohio State in their own house. Of course, the game you mentioned, Oregon will be about a 17.5-point dog, at least as the market suggests now, for the trip down to Atlanta, an extremely fast track against a Georgia defense breaking in some new faces, but they do have their old reliable Payne's boy, Stetson Bennett, under center for that opener. So it'll be an interesting game to see Dan Lanning matched up against his old team if Bo Nix can find a couple holes, if they do exist in that Georgia defense. Defensive.
What are people going to do now that fan club is completely filled and was as of like 6 months
ago? This is the kind of thing, Payne, and I've actually read some articles in recent weeks talking about Stetson as a dark horse Heisman contender at odds of 125-1. You're the guy, like we like to talk about, that goes into that small nightclub. You see the band when there's about 50 or 100 people there. They start to play in bigger and bigger venues, and you go, you know what? I can't afford to pay what they're asking me for tickets because I'm not sure the product is that good. And that may be what you have to do with Stetson Bennett. You bought the stock at the bottom. You sold at the top right in the wake of the national championship win. And now you may have an opportunity to short a little bit more if people really want to buy into this Georgia offense.
Listen, the same thing I said at the top. That 4-word phrase, I'm just not going to say it.
when you're looking at Oregon defensively here, tough to replace the kind of production that you get from a Kayvon Thibodeau. Obviously, never realized, in my opinion, his full potential as a member of the Oregon team. Was inconspicuously absent for long stretches of games, but his talent speaks for itself, and that's the reason that the New York Giants use a top 10 pick on him. But there still are other players to get excited about up front. But Payne, when I look at this defense, I have questions about the defensive backfield. Tough to replace some of the key contributors there. But Oregon can make a legitimate case, if they stay healthy, that this is the best linebacking core, not just in the Pac-12, but maybe even a top 5 unit overall in the entire country, with the likes of Noah Sewell and hopefully a healthy Justin Flo to clean things up.
4 defensive coordinators in 5 seasons for Oregon. You start to feel bad for some of the upperclassmen. I think there's some sustainability about the current staff in place, barring not getting some type of inclusion to a big boy conference. I like Dan Lanning. You like the defensive minds he brought with him. Tosh Lupoy is a guy that's been on Nick Saban's staff. He's coached in the NFL recently. Matt Polage was with Dave Aranda at Baylor the past 2 seasons. So a lot of pedigree guys, and that's always a good start. The front 7 looks strong if Justin Flo, as you mentioned, can stay healthy and Oregon can find an edge rusher. Dan Lanning potentially walks into a situation where he has one of the best interior duos in the Pac-12 with Popo and Dorless. Popo graded out the second best Oregon defender last season, and Dorless finished top 5 in value over replacement among qualifying defensive linemen. So that's a nice tandem there. Noah Sewell, to me, is a little overhyped. The production just doesn't match the accolades yet. I think if Oregon's having issues getting to the quarterback naturally, Sewell's a guy whose best attribute is rushing the passer, finished top 10 in pressure grade among linebackers. He's 260 pounds, so he's a liability in coverage. It makes sense he's the backer you send. Justin Flo's played 67 snaps in 2 seasons. He was the number 6 overall player in the 2020 class. Let's see if he can play like a 5-star talent. I won't lie. It makes me a little nervous that many of the key cogs returning, and we all believe the front 7 is Oregon's defensive strength. The group finished 84th in line yards, 82nd in stuff rate. Havoc rate wasn't impressive. Did pressure the quarterback at a rate that was in the top 3rd of Power 5 teams, but couldn't get the quarterback to the ground, right, with a top 5 pick in edge rusher Thibodeau. The front has to be the strong point because the Ducks secondary has some questions, as you alluded to, right? Christian Johnson, the 4-star transfer from Colorado, looks like Oregon's lead corner. Dante Manning, a top 40 player in the 2020 class, needs to step up. To this point, he hasn't contributed plus snaps. If he can play at like 70% of his 5-star potential, that'll help. I know Lanning loves the true freshman, Jaleel Florence. He was an early enrollee. Let's see if he's in the plans early based on camp performance. Overall, it's just a really thin secondary with guys transferring out and moving on, and the guys that do return aren't great. You have to hope a new regime helps some of the situational shortcomings as well. I like DeRuyter. It was shocking as I dug into some of these numbers, but like Oregon was outside the top 100 in finishing drive defense. When opponents got to the Duck screen zone, they averaged 4.2 points per trip. Oregon couldn't get off the field on 3rd and 4th down, outside the top 100 in success rate allowed on those money downs. So maybe situationally things can improve a little bit. Lanning also has some pressure to get things figured out early, right? 2 of the first 3 games are against Georgia and BYU. Dogs are a top 10 offense. BYU a top 15 offense. Ducks also have UCLA and Utah on the schedule. 2 offenses projected in our top 15. You have a trip at Oregon State to close the season. That's another projected top 35 offense. So 5 super strong offenses on the schedule year 1. Fortunately, the remaining 7 other offenses are pretty much dog water.
I mean, the key for Oregon, obviously the Georgia game, I won't call it a free roll, as I'm sure Duck fans love to think they can shock the world and pull off an outright upset in week 1. But you look at going into the bye week, what this team will have to do. And I think that BYU game week 3 on September 17th really becomes the swing game to define what Oregon can be this season. Because BYU, I'm sure, has expectations with their very difficult schedule of getting into the college football playoff mix. mix. Oregon will be about a 3.5, 4-point favorite in that game, I'd have to imagine, when we get to kickoff. And then Oregon follows it up with 2 out of their next 3 on the road, but games that should be winnable against the likes of Washington State, a home date against Stanford, and then on the road at Arizona before they get into the second half of things. So early on, we'll have a pretty good indication of exactly what Dan Lanning's team is all about. And I know a lot of folks up there in the Pacific Northwest believe Oregon a legitimate shot to win the Pac-12. But to your point, I think they have to gel defensively. They have to generate more pressure up front, especially to take some of the burden of proof off of that back end that's largely unproven, breaking in so many unfamiliar faces. When you look at Oregon's competition, traditional North rivals, Washington, going to be a little bit better. Obviously, a change at the helm there in Seattle. You're looking at Washington 17-1 underdogs to win the conference this season. Their win total 7.5. You do need to lay $1.25 to go over. In comes one of Payne's other man crushes in the coaching ranks, Kalen DeBoer, after 2 seasons at Fresno State, after he cut his teeth as offensive coordinator at Indiana, said a big part of his initial efforts required re-recruiting some of the players that were already on campus. But DeBoer's biggest score may be bringing in a quarterback he's very familiar with. Michael Penix, often injured during his time in Bloomington. He'll head out to Seattle. And while they haven't officially announced a starting quarterback, you'd have to believe that that's the direction that Ryan Grubb is looking to go in, although he'll compete with Dylan Morris and Sam Heward. Morris finished the season last year with 12 picks, more than any other Pac-12 quarterback, and finished 10th out of 12 qualifying passers in completion percentage and yards per attempt. But this is a Washington team, Payne, that a lot of people thought could be a top 15 group last year. Your thoughts and sentiments on Jimmy Lake's merits as a head coach are well documented, and I think they bore fruit when you see Washington goes 4-8. But this was one of the most profitable teams in the country for us, not because we bet on Washington, but because we knew Jimmy Lake and company were going to bang their head into a brick wall, and we could consistently get to the window betting them first half under because the defense was good. They didn't give up big plays in the back, and if you wanted to move the ball against them, you could do it by putting together long time-consuming drives on the ground, and Washington was never a threat to score more than 10 points and a half.
I hate that we can't pile on Jimmy Lake for a 3rd season.
He may resurface somewhere else. You never know if he will resurface somewhere else that we can bet against some of his offensive acumen.
Jimmy Lake literally made me want to start a company that helps programs dissect their final 2 or 3 candidates. Once the program identifies 2 or 3 guys it likes, I'll dig into each and eliminate the weak. And while I'm expensive, I would have been cheaper than the $9.9 million buyout for Jimmy Lake.
That's not true.
In the NIL era,
you might have cost more than $9.9 million. Don't sugarcoat things around here.
Well, I mean, I would have given him a break. Think about what Washington could have done with another $7.5 million after my fees, Todd. They could have bought a bunch of players. Now, I like Kalen DeBoer, but I will be honest, the circumstances around Washington football appear a little harder now until things are settled, right? Are they in one of the big 2 conferences? The Big Ten basically said, sit in the corner and wait until we're ready to figure out if we want you, after asking for inclusion 24 hours after USC and UCLA. If you're stuck for a few seasons, we know Utah is pretty rugged, right? And Oregon has 2 A-plus recruiters with Lanning and Kenny Dillingham. Strictly speaking as a coach, though, Kalen DeBoer is a home run hire. Good offensive mind. Won 3 national championships at Sioux Falls. Every stop at a big boys school, too. DeBoer's made the offense and the team better. If you kind of trek this timeline, in 2017, DeBoer took the Fresno OC job. Inherited an offense that was 127th in schedule-adjusted efficiency. After 2 seasons, it was 37th. His final season as the OC, Fresno won 12 games. Indiana plucks him off, and he is the Hoosiers OC in 2019. Took the Hoosiers offense from 55th to 22nd in schedule-adjusted efficiency in 1 year. After that, Fresno won 4 games in 2019 without DeBoer. They smartly hired him as their head coach in 2020. In 2 seasons, the offense went from 50th to top 25 fringe area there. Won 10 games the final year. And we know how hard it was for first-year coaches in 2020 with the big C floating around. This Kalen DeBoer hire is so many deviations better than Jimmy Lake. It's absolutely nuts. Now, kind of quickly getting into the offense here, I don't really think there's a battle. DeBoer brought in Michael Penix Jr. It's who he worked with at Indiana in 2019. So Penix knows the offense, the terminology. Penix can bridge the gap to a legacy 5-star Sam Heward. And the key here, Both are lefties. So Washington won't have to change protections or shifts or blindsides up front if Pennick gets injured for the 5th straight season, or the light turns on and Hoover is just, the better option. But if you go back to 2019, Pennick's adjusted accuracy was 80% in DeBoer's offense. Averaged 8.6 yards per pass attempt, had more than a 3-to-1 touchdown pass to turnover worthy throw rate, and that was with a poor offensive line. It seems clear to me Washington has some really young, talented receivers with some game experience that have the ability to boom here. Jalen McMillan seems poised to break out. You have Jalen Polk, average 2.5 yards per route run as a freshman. Then you have the big body guy, 6'4", Rome. He can, box out some defenders. If you look where Penix likes to throw a lot of the intermediate curls and posts, it's going to be fun watching that as a big body guy. So I think he'll have a decent run this season. Washington's O-line hit the lotto, right? Jackson Kirkland was granted another year of eligibility. He could be the best left tackle in the Pac-12. Guard situation looks really solid. Right tackle has multiple guys capable of playing well. That's going to be a fun camp battle to follow there. I have zero questions about Washington's O-line improving this season. I really think that's a unit that just got a boost with Jackson Kirkland coming back. The schedule of defenses Washington plays isn't that daunting either, right? Just one defense projected in our top 25 with Michigan State. There's 3 other defenses that crack our top 40, but the other 8 defenses have an average projected efficiency rank of 96th. So I like DeBoer to kind of get this flowing a little bit earlier than people might expect.
Yeah, 4 straight home games will kick things off. And while we would have said last year going into the season, a home date against Montana should be a contest that's a glorified exhibition, I won't give them such a free pass. But you look at what Washington will deal with out of the gates. Kent State, Portland State, a home date against Michigan State, which I think will be illustrative of exactly what Washington's ceiling may be like this season, along with giving us a better litmus test for where the Spartans are in Mel Tucker's second campaign, and then a home date against Stanford before they'll hit the road and head down to the Rose Bowl to take on UCLA. But you talked about the offensive line, and I want to echo your sentiments there. I think that was one of the more overarching comments that I saw repeated time and time again, that it wasn't a lack of talent that held Washington back in that particular group last season. It was more an ability to adapt to the scheme or lack thereof. That's what you saw from this team, and clearly was on full display, as this was one of the worst teams in the country when it came to running the football. But that didn't stop Washington from running on known running situations or on second and long over and over again, constantly putting their quarterbacks in poor positions. Now, when you look...
See, there's a correlation there, right? When you are predictable in running, teams can just load the box and suddenly your offensive line doesn't look as good. So having a little imagination, not being as predictable, that's going to help an offensive line and a run game be a little more efficient.
Well, they didn't get holes to run through. They weren't able to break tackles. I mean, it was, to your point, a perfect storm of ineptitude that led to Washington's inability to get things going there. There are some nice depth pieces there. It'll be real interesting to see who wins the RB1 battle out of camp, but it appears DeBoer may hand the ball off to a number of folks, especially early on. When you look at Washington defensively, I think we can start with the back and maybe work forward, because it's obviously hard, even a program that's recruited as well as they have in the secondary, to replace 2 NFL caliber corners like the Huskies will be tasked with this year. Gone is Trent McDuffie and Kyler Gordon. The secondary was outstanding. When you look at their ability to limit big plays, it's even more impressive when you consider the fact that Washington didn't provide a ton of resistance up front. They were a little bit leaky against the run. Expect the safeties and guys like Alex Cook and Asa Turner maybe to come down a little bit, help more in run support, but it could put defensive backs on an island. When you look at the Washington Huskies defensively this year, is there reason for optimism even having to replace so much talent at the back?
This is the area of the team that makes me nervous, because there's just not a ton here. William Inge and Chuck Moore will co-coordinate the defense. It's the same 4-2-5 scheme, just with different principles, but the concepts are similar. So the transition process might not be too daunting, which is nice. Really, for me, the side of the ball comes down to a handful of the horses Washington has staying healthy to be competitive, because there's not a lot of depth, and a lot of those horses have not proven they can stay healthy. We talked a little bit prior to recording, maybe the new strength and conditioning program, which seems to be very good, helps limit some of these in-season injuries. ZTF returns from multiple injuries. The most severe was an Achilles, but over the last 2 seasons, he has a 25% win rate. You have 2 really good defensive linemen. Tooley at the tackle position is versatile, is good against the run, can get after the quarterback from the interior. Toughness in the interior of the D-line are the question marks. Washington really got bullied last season. Some of it was injuries. Some of it was guys' disdain for Jimmy Lake. Some of it was the scheme, and some of it was being soft. Either way, Washington was outside the top 100 in line yards, opportunity rate, stuff rate, and power success rate. That led to Washington being outside the top 100 in EPA per rush allowed. Teams would smartly alter their offensive game plan to attack that weakness. Opponent run rates increased 8% over their season average. Linebacker position has some boom-bust potential to it. Cam Bright transfers in from Pittsburgh. Had a really, fantastic seasons in 19 and 20. One of the better all-around linebackers in the ACC. Suddenly his production fell off a cliff last season. If he regains his form, that's a nice transfer addition. All the hype is about Carson Bruner looking amazing this offseason. He was solid in coverage and getting after the quarterback last year. Let's see if another year in the strength and conditioning program helps toughen him up a little bit. But to your point at the top with Washington's defense, it is impossible for the secondary not to regress with both Kyler Gordon and Trent McDuffie getting drafted inside the first 39 picks. As bad as that Washington defense was last season, they were top 5 in EPA per pass allowed. Less than 32% of pass attempts grade successful. There looks to be lots of mixed and matched pieces back there. Asa Turner is Washington's best returning player in the secondary. Michelle Powell has shown to be a plus player. Jordan Perriman comes over from UC Davis, was solid there, but let's see if the uptick in offensive competition maybe hinders his ability there. Overall, both the high-end talent and depth decrease in Washington's secondary, and that's a concern when you look at some of the pass offenses in this conference, Todd.
I'm just disappointed we didn't get to hear you pronounce some of these Washington defenders' names in their entirety. I was really looking forward to, instead of going ZTF, you were going to try and go with Zion Tupola Fatui, and I'm obviously butchering it. Or like you said, for Tuli up front, I mean, you could say Latuli Gasanoa as many times as you want, but there's no doubt these Polynesian names will definitely challenge our aptitude week in, week out if we find ourselves talking about the Washington Huskies stop unit.
For the sake of their families, I'm just going with first names, whatever's easiest, nicknames. That's what we're going with.
A man who goes by one name himself, anointing defensive players on the Washington Huskies one-name nicknames as well. I can applaud that kind of effort. From Washington and all the question marks they have defensively, even with optimism around the offensive unit, we'll head to Middle America and talk about the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. And when you look at the Irish, obviously no odds to win a conference because they're not in one as of yet. But their win total, it sits at 8.5. You do have to lay $1.40 if you want to go over the total. Fans, they grew somewhat tired of Brian Kelly despite his 54 victories in 5 seasons because Notre Dame couldn't find a way to break through against the upper echelon. Obviously, the last time we saw Notre Dame, they were busy blowing a 21-point lead in the Fiesta Bowl, but the fan base obviously has put all of their energies and efforts behind loving Marcus Freeman, so he's given a free pass for the adjustments he did not make in the second half, thankfully to our benefit, Payne, as Oklahoma State ticket holders in that game. When you look at Notre Dame this season, and I guess the overarching question is this, while they go through a period of transition, will a 10-win season in year one be considered a success if the Irish run the table against everybody not named Ohio State and Clemson, or do Notre Dame fans, are they conditioned to expect more, and it feels like they need to see this team really pull off one marquee upset to believe that Marcus Freeman is going to be their guy to take them to the levels that Brian Kelly couldn't achieve?
Isn't their win total 8.5?
I know what their win total are, but at the same time, there are fan bases that create unrealistic expectations, and we'll get to one of those when we start to move down the coast into Southern California. But if you talk to Irish fans, if you look at their schedule, and if they were to lose to Ohio State, Clemson, let's throw in a third loss to say either BYU, North Carolina, or USC, and they finish 9-3. I do wonder if they see that season as success despite exceeding odds makers' expectations.
As it stands right now, right before we get to the offense and the defense, I have Notre Dame a clear favorite in 9 games. 15-point dog in the opener at Ohio State. Coin flip, hosting Clemson. 3-point road favorite at USC. But it really feels like there's a ton of variance with Notre Dame, right? There's this wide range of what Tyler Buchner can be this season. If he's elite, 11-1 gets Notre Dame to the college football playoff if the one loss is opening week at Ohio State or Clemson becomes the best team in football. If Buchner doesn't play to his potential, eclipsing the 8.5 win total could be difficult, right? There's something in my gut, similar to yours, it sounds like, that's not ready to buy this staff. Marcus Freeman undoubtedly is a good defensive mind. He is one of the it coaches on the recruiting trail right now. It won't end there, but Notre Dame currently has the number 1 class in 2023. He's relatable to the players. He's smart. The staff has that new car smell on it where you can sell a vision, which is easier than having proof. But literally 10 months ago, the most knowledgeable Notre Dame fans were bitching about Freeman's defensive scheme and game plans against FSU and Toledo. Just this past January, Todd, you mentioned, right? The defensive savant, Marcus Freeman, is blowing 21-point leads in his first game as head coach to an Oklahoma State offense outside the top 50. So there are some things here that
you will put some respect on Spencer Sanders' name, Payne, for what he did down there in Glendale that fine second half.
It was a fantastic second half. I won't disagree. I do appreciate you, as we're on our recruiting trip dinner, not telling the person that said they had to leave in the second half because he could see where it was going and it was cold, that we had an Oklahoma State ticket in hand.
I don't like to rub salt in people's wounds. That's something that you do to me on a week-in, week-out basis throughout the course of our college football and NFL trials and tribulations.
You don't actually believe that.
No, I don't, but I still will never forgive you for the Alamo Bowl, but I'm not going to relive it again here today, despite us having already broken down Oregon.
Let's get to Notre Dame's offense already.
All right.
Would you lead us to the promised land?
So when you look at the Irish offense, Tommy Rees, I have to give him a ton of credit for some of what he's been able to accomplish. The only returning coach on the offensive side of the ball. He'll have his 3rd starting quarterback in 3 years. You mentioned it. Tyler Buchner poised to take over for Jack Cohn, who inherited the role from Ian Book before that. When we saw Buchner a season ago, run first guy, the biggest question I think every Notre Dame fan and handicapper alike will ask themselves is, can he improve as a reliable passer? Accuracy was the major concern, and he didn't, unfortunately, have live reps in the blue gold game because he was dealing with an ankle injury. An ankle injury suffered unlike most college football players will ever suffer during their time. He stumbled down the stairs after meeting with a history professor. I'm not sure most college football players even know who their history professors are, but this is why we know Notre Dame has slightly more rigorous academic standards. Questions abound in the backfield as well when you lose a player like Kyron Williams. Logan Diggs was expected to be the guy, but he suffers a torn labrum in the spring game, and suddenly a Notre Dame receiving room has a bevy of questions as there's no proven commodity there other than who most people believe will be the number 1 tight end selected in next year's NFL draft in Michael Mayer. Fortunately for the Irish, though, they have continuity along the offensive line, and for stretches last year, that was the biggest weakness for this unit.
Year 3 for Tommy Rees as Notre Dame's OC. It feels like a big season for him, largely because the feedback from those who follow intently or cover the team that also have access to data is that Tommy Rees is solid, but he hasn't proven to be great or even innovative. The offense is completely Tommy Rees's now. He doesn't have to cater to Brian Kelly, but he also can't hide behind it being someone else's either. So let's see what this looks like. And it's great Notre Dame landed CJ Carr, the number 4 quarterback in the 2024 class, but it's July 2022. Is Notre Dame going to be able to keep Carr if it doesn't appear Tommy Rees can improve Tyler Buchner's game? Can you keep Carr if the offensive efficiency regresses and you only win 8 or 9 games each of the next 2 seasons? Just feels like a really big year for Tommy Rees, and not many are talking about it. What he has to work with this season is an uber-talented Tyler Buchner, high 4-star fringe top 10 quarterback in the 2021 class. Buchner has talent, right? He's got upside, great mobility for a quarterback. His reps were limited last season, as you pointed out. Would have been great having him see live bullets in the spring game, but that ankle injury hindered his ability to do that. What I see from an extremely small sample, and that's the caveat, Tyler Buckner was solid when you kept him clean. 81% adjusted accuracy there. When Buckner had the chance to throw with play action, 136 passer rating. But when you got pressure on him naturally, Buckner struggled to process. When you didn't blitz him and made him go through progressions from the pocket, he struggled. Those are things you would expect from a true freshman. I think some of that gets cleaned up. I would expect far more read option with loads of designed runs. Again, very small sample, but that's kind of the skinny on Tyler Buckner. Notre Dame's offensive line is going to be damn good. And this is another position group that requires manual adjustment, right? Data is great, and many have access to it these days, and people expanding their abilities, building models is fantastic. You have to play at this level. But there's still handicapping that goes into this. You have to make tweaks. And specific to Notre Dame's offensive line, it was injured early last season. Dame played with 4 different left tackle combinations the first 6 games. That weakened other positions along the line because guys were playing out of position. Blake Fisher, a top 60 player in the 2021 class at tackle, tore his meniscus the opening game as well. He's back. It was a young unit. But once the young guys got game action, and then you had Joe Alt return at left tackle along with Andrew Kristofik at guard, the Irish O-line surged the final 6 games. So using season-long metrics for your priors with Notre Dame's O-line isn't smart unless you're making some of these manual tweaks. Running back room, as you mentioned, lost Kyron Williams. Not just a good running back, but a really nice receiver out of the backfield. Logan Diggs tore his labrum in spring. He's going to miss the early part of the season. Then Jadarian Price looked fantastic this spring. He tore his Achilles recently. Chris Tyree is a familiar name, but I don't think he's a bell cow in stature or ability, so I think Audric Estime will be the beneficiary. He runs hard, has an ability to break tackles. He keeps the pile moving forward, so look for him as kind of the sleeper out of the backfield. Receiver room has questions, to your point. I think if health remains, Tommy Rees can piece together a decent group of pass catchers here. It helps having an elite tight end in Michael Mayer, 2 yards per route run from the position, super strong hands, so he constantly wins his contested catches. Mayer's versatile, right? Can play inline, can play in the slot. Second most valuable tight end in the country last season. Notre Dame does have 3 veterans in Avery Davis, Brandon Leslie, and Joe Wilkins. But the guy to really keep an eye on, Lorenzo Styles. Had a great freshman year, high 4-star kid with deep speed. If Lorenzo Styles takes that next step and becomes a trusted weapon downfield and you have Mayer dominating underneath, that's a really nice duo. And then look at the defensive schedule. Elite defensive unit hosting Clemson off their bye. Ohio State out of the chute with a brand new DC operating a complex scheme. But aside from those 2 games, our average projected efficiency rank of the 10 other defenses Notre Dame will face this season, 70th. So I do think if you can get Tyler Buckner to even play at a level close to his rating, this offense does have a chance. But I'm really interested to see what it looks like with Tommy Rees having full control. We know Brian Kelly, for all of his potential shortcomings in recruiting or being labeled lazy or not playing ball with the boosters, he was a very good offensive mind in scheme and designing and game planning. So that's all on Tommy Rees's shoulders now.
Yeah, an interesting team on that front because we know they're going to get tested right out of the gates. Can they match the Buckeyes score for score? But again, Irish fans out there, you don't use that as the determining factor. Even if you lose that game by 3 touchdowns in Columbus, you have to follow it up with wins in successive weeks and home games against Marshall, Cal. And then another test where the Irish will be less than a touchdown favorite, but a game they should win in Chapel Hill against North Carolina. When we look at this Fighting Irish group on the defensive side of the ball, Al Golden steps in. He's now the 4th new defensive coordinator in 6 seasons, the 3rd in 3 years. This was an Irish defensive line that does have a player to build around, and Isaiah Foskey, who's got a first-round draft grade as things stand now. The linebacking core has experience, but the $100 million question that I think a lot of people will ask, are there true difference makers there? Meanwhile, in the secondary, losing a player like Kyle Hamilton isn't easy, but let's not ignore the fact that Hamilton missed the final 6 games anchoring the Irish secondary, and to Marcus Freeman's credit, he goes out and he brings in Northwestern transfer Brandon Joseph, who I think can be leaned upon as a reliable stalwart in the back. The big question, though, is at corner, which was a glaring loss versus Oklahoma State and will obviously be tested right out of the gates week 1 against the Buckeyes when you're matching up with a player like Jackson Smith and Jigba and Marvin Harrison Jr.
Al Golden comes over from the Cincinnati Bengals, made a nice Super Bowl run there last year. He is going to be the DC under Marcus Freeman. I'm sure it's going to be a collaborative effort. It does sound like Golden will have his own imprint, though. Both of those guys, whether it's Marcus Freeman or Al Golden, they've shown an ability in the past to play multiple fronts and mold things to their personnel. You do have lots of key cogs back. 4 of the top 5 graded players that contributed at least 380 snaps or more return. Notre Dame was elite against the pass last season, finished 3rd in opponent-adjusted EPA pass defense. They were great limiting explosives through the air. You mentioned the loss of Kyle Hamilton. Certainly, he's going to be missed to an extent, and every talking head will mention him. But Notre Dame not only lived life without him the final 6 games last season, but they moved on and they adjusted quite well. And Dame also landed a 4-star safety transfer in 2020 All-American Brandon Joseph from Northwestern to replace Hamilton. Cam Hart looks like Notre Dame's shutdown corner, only allowed 48% of targets to be completed and surrendered a 61 passer rating when targeted. Notre Dame was a little soft against the run last season, outside the top 60 in line yards and 42nd in opportunity rate. That combination had Notre Dame barely inside the top 50 in EPA per rush allowed. I would say, though, some of that questionable defense up front from Marcus Freeman and Notre Dame really was early on in the year, playing 3-man boxes in the opener against a Florida State team that couldn't pass, felt as ill-prepared as humanly possible. Hopefully, guys like Lacey and the Harvard transfer Chris Smith provide a little more run stuff ability. Pressure, I don't know if that's going to be an issue. Dame finished top 7 in pressure rate among Power 5 defenses last season, in their best in Isaiah Foskey returns. He is definitely projected to be a first-round pick. 12% of his defensive snaps ended with him getting a pressure or a stop last season. Most of the time, Marcus Freeman's defenses were buttoned up last year. That led to some good situational metrics. Dame did well limiting quality possessions and points per quality possession. Just 2.9 points per trip inside the 40 surrendered when offenses finally got there. This is going to be a damn good defense that I think fights to be, in that 8 to 15 range nationally. There are some good offenses on the schedule. Ohio State, out of the gate, likely the best in the country. BYU, USC to end the season. UNC won't be as good as public projections, but still a solid offense. So 4 potential top 25 offenses. Everything else is pretty manageable unless Clemson's offense finds another gear from the quarterback position.
An interesting team, no doubt about it, because obviously Irish fans, when you bring in Marcus Freeman, you hope he can get you to the top of the mountain. For Notre Dame, that prides itself on winning national championship, college football playoff berths are not exactly what they're after. And of course, we'll keep close tabs on what Notre Dame's football future looks like. Will they ultimately join the Big Ten and get in one of the power conferences, or continue to go about their business as an independent? One of the other independents that Notre Dame will see on their schedule this year, we know will play its final season of independent football before it heads over to the Big 12. That would be the BYU Cougars, and those teams will do battle on October 8th out here in the desert. When you look at BYU this season, their win total sits at 8.5. You do have to lay $1.30 to go over the total at FanDuel Sportsbook. And Kalani Sitake, a guy who has drawn a ton of criticism. I've criticized him myself. Wasn't sure if he was a coach that was able to get out of his own way. Has definitely silenced some of the naysayers in recent seasons. Was courted for multiple high-profile positions before electing to remain on campus in Provo. When you look at the BYU Cougars, they're 21-4 over the past 2 seasons, cracking the top 10 and finishing in the top 20 each season. They swept their entire portion of the Pac-12 schedule a season ago, which included a big win over Utah early in the season. BYU, Payne, returns 18 to 19 starters, depending on how you look at the count, including all 11 contributors on defense. They have a quarterback in Jaron Hall that's healthy and prime for a season in which the Cougars really need him to break out. And by all accounts, believe that his arm strength has improved as he's worked with John Beck this offseason to try and improve his prospects at the next level, where some draft pundits have him going inside the top 15. The main 4 key contributors that BYU will have to replace: running back Tyler Algier, receiver Neil Powell, center James Empey, and defensive end Uriah Latawa, and I see why earlier in the show you chose not to pronounce a lot of these names as I butcher all of them. But the one thing that Sataki said coming out of spring practice, he says these guys all love each other. They weren't happy with how the season ended last year, which was a loss against UAB, is right around a touchdown favorite, albeit a BYU team that was extremely banged up. When I look at the Cougars' outlook in 2022, where do you think some of the biggest questions are, or where can BYU fans be excited about what this product will look like week in, week out?
So BYU is just one of 19 schools returning its head coach, both coordinators, and starting quarterback. They're number one in the country in returning production as well. So that's the baseline for all the BYU optimism. And if you listen to spring interviews, all the buzz is that spring practice number one this year looked better than the final spring practice last year, that they're way ahead of schedule. And you see these interviews, to your point with Jaren Hall, it looks like he's put on a ton of muscle. And he did go work with John Beck, the former Miami Dolphin, this offseason, improving arm strength, working on his deep ball. I am intrigued to see if Jaren Hall takes that next step as a passer. Metrically, he wasn't close to Zach Wilson's final season production. But you do have a super athletic quarterback in Jaren Hall. He can throw on the run. The offense doesn't really ask Jaren Hall to throw into congestion or tight windows, so all the turnover-worthy plays are kept at a minimum. There's lots of big-time throws down the sidelines. But in totality, a 72% adjusted completion rate. That has to improve. He's been solid to all sectors of the field, short, intermediate, deep, damn good when kept clean, good using play action, but the inconsistent accuracy has really, hindered Jaren Hall from going from good to elite. We'll see if that changes this season. He's hinted that this will be his last, so maybe he thinks it'll be a big year, and he's worked and improved on all of those things. What will be unquestionably elite is BYU's offensive line. My goodness, it's been a factory over there in recent years. 7 of the top 8 guys returned from a group that finished top 30 in line yards and stuff rate allowed, top 15 in opportunity rate and sack rate allowed. Virtually every single metric from run blocking to pass protection was top shelf for BYU. And with Mario leaving for Miami, BYU landed a high-end 4-star transfer tackle from Oregon who will fit in perfectly to the right side of the line. And then for good measure, BYU went out, landed the 22nd best JUCO player this past cycle to add to the O-line group as well. Pass catching options are stocked like a trout pond with Gunner and Puka. Both averaged more than 3 yards per route run. Good depth behind those two battling it out for wide receiver 3. Tight end tandem is solid with Rex and Holker. Certainly, Tyler Algier will be missed. He had a 2-season stretch that was record-breaking, and he provided an element to the offense that was vital, because you think of a spread pistol offense with a mobile quarterback that likes to take deep shots, but you also need to grind out yards and keep defenses honest. Tyler Algier, the last 2 seasons combined, was number 1 in yards after contact, top 5 in forced missed tackles. That's a decent-sized loss. Now, Christian Brooks is the transfer from Cal. He comes over to fill that void. BYU won a recruiting battle over Notre Dame for his services. Brooks is big and physical and breaks a good amount of tackles himself, so let's see if he can play to a level where running back production doesn't fall off a cliff. Really, what BYU needs from Brooks is to keep defenses honest, right? If BYU hands it off on first down, you need Brooks to keep the offense ahead of the chains. In short yardage, keep the chains moving. In confined space, when BYU enters the red zone, right, have Brooks, be able to keep the offense physical. That's what BYU really needs from Brooks, right? He's not going to be Tyler Algier. That's not going to happen. But he's at least serviceable. He keeps the pile moving forward, and I think he'll at least help provide that extra dimension to a pass offense that's going to be pretty elite.
If there's reason to be optimistic about this team offensively, there may be even more so about what this stop unit is going to look like week in, week out. If you're trying to put together a composite snapshot of how BYU season went last year, this was a group that was extremely banged up down the stretch. They couldn't stop the run and get off the field. You hope some of those issues will be rectified. They're a little bit deeper there, obviously significantly healthier. But the Cougars have not had a player paying register a double-digit sack season since Bronson Kafusi did it back in 2015. There's a lot of optimism that Tyler Batty this year will be a player capable of snapping that streak. Defense returns more than 200 total starts combined at all three levels. They return more than 90% of their total defensive production from last year. And while you did worry about their inability to stop the run, like I said, I don't think that's as big a problem out of the gates. But this is a BYU defense that'll be leaned on heavily given the depth of their schedule. When you look at BYU on this side of the ball, does it have the potential to exceed all expectations?
This is the side of the ball that really interests me. And people have heard me preach for years about offense being more valuable than defense, and that's not changing. It is. But I think BYU's offense is only going to be varying degrees of awesome if Jaren Hall stays healthy. So I kind of want to approach this side of the ball a little differently, because for BYU to truly make a playoff run with one loss or better, the defense has to match the public hype and expectation. And the fascinating conversation to me is, at least from the perspective of schedule of offenses BYU plays, when I look at the timing and the perception of brand, those two things could really help BYU's defense and program overall. From a perception standpoint, we see Baylor and Oregon and Notre Dame and Arkansas and Boise, like big names. That's going to play well amongst the talking heads debating BYU's inclusion if they have one loss. But there's actually only one offense on the schedule we project to have a top 25 offense. 9 offenses on the schedule we project outside the top 60. Then you look at timing. Baylor week 2 before they potentially find answers to all the lost weapons. Oregon week 3 before a completely different offensive coach, scheme, and quarterback get on the same page, and maybe after facing a physical Georgia team week 1, there's attrition for Oregon. Notre Dame in the middle of the season. We talked about variance with that offense because of Tyler Buckner. What if it's negative variance? Arkansas lost an NFL weapon that doesn't appear to have been replaced. Sometimes all it takes is timing and a few breaks, and that could be the case to get BYU's defense to a level that matches its hype. For me, and this isn't new, anytime we've broken down BYU games in recent years, I've pounded the table that the defense isn't as good as people think, that I hate rush 3, drop 8 defense when it's not a curveball but a philosophy. It's maddening to me playing such a conservative style. It leads to being bullied. It doesn't allow you to get pressure. And sure enough, last season, BYU's 89th in havoc rate, 113th in pressure rate. And I agree with you, but the narrative might not be as accurate as you and other people believe, that BYU's defense suddenly hit the skids once injuries hit. And no doubt, BYU's defense is thin, and it did regress once injuries piled up. We're making a tiny manual adjustment to priors because of that. But even assessing the 5-0 start, where BYU gave up less than 20 points per game, heading into that Boise game, which they ultimately lost, BYU's defense was outside the top 70 in EPA per rush and EPA per pass. It couldn't get off the field on 3rd and 4th down. Again, those issues were magnified after a few key injuries, but the problems were there far prior to the injuries, Todd.
And to your point, a lot of name brands on the schedule for BYU, and the way you look at this dynamic shaping up, they'll start things out on the road down there in Tampa against USF, a game where USF caught them at the right spot, covered easily, catching 23.5 in that game. They'll get a home date against Baylor, where they'll be right around a touchdown favorite, go on the road to Oregon as short underdogs, get a home game against Wyoming, Utah State, Notre Dame in Vegas, homecoming against Arkansas, at Liberty, ECU, and then at Boise State. The reason I bring those games up, Payne, is BYU doesn't get its bye week until November 12th. It's extremely difficult for any college football team to play 10 straight games, and you wonder if there's going to be a diminished level of production on either the offensive or defensive side for a team that believes that, hey, look, maybe they do have 11-1 as their potential ceiling. I'm going to be very interested to see what this BYU team looks like, not only on offense as Jaren Hall continues to rise up draft boards, but to your point, can they rectify some of the things that ail them on the defensive side?
And that's why the win total is 8.5, right? Because of that schedule and the perception. But I do think there's an element here. If you can get some positive variance, the ball bounces your way, you sustain good injury luck, you catch some teams at the right time, and certainly the brands of those teams that you play aren't as necessarily as good as the brand. Just my vibe. But we'll see what unfolds. Obviously, this is a tough task when you look at the schedule. There's a reason the win total is 8.5. Going 11-1 would be absolutely fantastic. But we have seen this team overachieve. I thought we discussed last year where we thought there would be some regression, and then they went out and won double digits again.
Yeah, I mean, again, like you said, Kalani Sitake for me is a coach that I didn't think highly of before. He's quietly silenced me with 21 wins in his last 25 games at head coach. We'll see if this BYU team is capable of reaching its ceiling and really throwing a wrench into the college football playoff picture if they can flirt with what we think 11-1 might be enough to get them in, depending on how that schedule shapes up. More or less halftime on our Pac-12 preview. I want to remind all of you, our loyal listeners, you can follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. Plenty of announcements coming there about season-long contests, when our NFL preview series will debut. We'll get to the SEC next week, but also want you, if you haven't already done so, to go over to FanDuel.com/BetTheBoard. Use the promo code BetTheBoard and utilize your no-sweat bet up to $1,000, whether it's college football that you're looking to try and wager on, the National Football League, or a variety of other wagering pursuits. FanDuel has you covered with a no-sweat bet if you use the promo code BetTheBoard. Payne, from BYU, we head into Tinseltown, where it's the USC Trojans amid the start of a new regime that see their win total set at 9.5. You do need to lay $1.20 to go over at FanDuel Sportsbook, and SC finds themselves conference favorites at plus $1.50 to win the Pac-12 championship. Obviously, Lincoln Riley, playoff appearance, Heisman winners, NFL quarterbacks. He has a very decorated resume for what he was able to accomplish as head man at Oklahoma. There are obviously reasons to feel optimistic about USC this fall. The offense returns an experienced line. Caleb Williams provides a dynamic dual-threat quarterback. Lincoln Riley, a significant coaching upgrade over his predecessor, Clay Helton. Then again, who isn't? And a schedule that appears, at least on the surface, to be much more manageable. But SC isn't without question marks and concerns as well. Depth, a very real problem, as they ended spring with just 60 healthy bodies. The culture around the program to close out last season wasn't great, and nearly 40 players who were on last year's team are no longer with the program, as 16 new players have transferred in. And to be quite honest, you read about this team, you watch them on the football field last year. The defense, in my opinion, lacks a lot of playmaking talent. Can Lincoln Riley start to scratch the surface of what USC needs to become to keep a very passionate alumni base happy about a return to prominence?
Feels like a really polarizing team. Either you think the talent in Lincoln Riley are good enough to make a college football playoff run, or you're selling, and you're selling hard. There doesn't seem to really be an in-between here. And that's what kind of intrigues me, is because I'm someone who's kind of in between. There was some sharp money that came in early this offseason under 9.5 wins. The market did not respect that. We're still at 9.5 over -20. The talent here is plentiful, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Caleb Williams, Mario Williams, Jordan Addison, who's apparently not happy right now, Travis Dye, Austin Jones, Brendan Rice. The list goes on with skill position talent. Hopefully everyone can get along and mesh. But there's clearly a different vibe this season with Lincoln Riley. He knows what he's doing. The offense makes sense. Last year's USC offense, whether it was scheme or game plan or formations, the ability for one play or drive to set up the next, it just wasn't there. The coaching staff didn't have the ability to really adjust to all the rush 3, drop 8 it was seeing from defenses. But from what I saw in the spring game and what I hear from people I trust, USC's offense came together quicker than anybody expected this spring. Now, that happens, right, when you have a quarterback and a head coach and an offense and some receivers that are all intertwined and know each other and know the system. If you're a naysayer or you're trying to play devil's advocate, Caleb Williams is probably the focal point. We know he's a 5-star talent. He's in the system for a second season. He's in a conference where defense is routinely optional. In my mind, it would be impossible for this offense not to be a top 25 unit. But if you're making the case for something worse, Caleb Williams has only started 7 games. And if you dig deep into Caleb Williams in Big 12 conference play last season, there was this seismic shift in production when he played a good defense compared to a poor defense. Williams was great against defenses in a lesser weight class, but he struggled when the competition increased. And hell, he got TKO'd in the Baylor game. Lincoln Riley threw in the frickin' towel. He was like, we're going back to Spencer Rattler here. if you look at the 6 Big 12 games Caleb Williams started last season and separate them into 2 categories, the first, teams that finished with a schedule-adjusted defense inside the top 20, of which there were 3, Oklahoma State, Iowa State, and Baylor, and then made a second bucket with the 3 defenses that finished outside the top 70 in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency, Kansas, Texas Tech, and TCU. The dichotomy is staggering. Against the 3 toughest defenses, Caleb Williams completed 49% of his passes. 6.4 yards per pass attempt. That was more than a 2.5-yard decrease below the season average. 4 passing touchdowns to 5 turnover-worthy plays. His adjusted accuracy was below 60%. Caleb Williams did all his damage against the Big 12's defensive dregs. 12 touchdown passes to just 1 turnover-worthy play against that trio of Kansas, Texas Tech, and TCU. Adjusted accuracy above 86%, 11.8 yards per pass attempt. It's just something to think about this season if it were to go awry. Obviously, you mentioned some of the depth concerns, Todd. But, we all look at Caleb Williams, and he's this 5-star recruit, and he, benched Spencer Rattler effectively. And, he's still a 5-star transfer, and we just have these high hopes for him. But it's like, he's still super young. There's not a lot of game action there. There is a different path to some negativity with his game. USC returns 4 offensive linemen. They bring in, a tackle transfer in Bobby Haskins from Virginia. He's an above-average tackle the last 800 snaps in the ACC, and that is a conference that sends more defensive line talent to the league than anyone not named the SEC. That was the only lineman Lincoln Riley brought in the 2022 class from high school or the portal. So it's a thin unit. I do like the interior of USC's O-line heading into the season. Andrew Voorhees is an elite pass blocker and run blocker. He's got a running mate in Brett Nealon, who's fantastic. Jonah Monahan was a plus lineman. USC's O-line caught a lot of flack in recent years, and for the most part, it is well-deserved. But last season, USC only allowed a 23% pressure rate on Keaton Slovis and Jackson Dart snaps. They were top 20 in opportunity rate. The real issue, again, is depth, and I think, Todd, you mentioned that number at the top of spring ending with only 60 healthy scholarship players, so that is something to think about. Overall, for USC's offense, though, if the high-end talent can get along and the money doesn't make things messy, and the O-line can stay healthy, this is an offense that can hang 40 pretty easily, especially with the schedule of defenses it plays. 1 projected top 30 defense, and it's Week 12 against Notre Dame. The 11 other defenses have an average projected efficiency rank of 70th. So this is going to be an offense that I think hums. I really believe that.
When I look at USC, I almost wonder if this is an offense that won't be plagued necessarily by its talent, but the compilation of egos and folks buying into the culture. You hate to say it because we'll obviously see if it manifests on the football field, but when a player like Jordan Addison gets recruited, whatever terminology you want to use, pulled away from Pittsburgh, and he's already apparently unhappy with his NIL deal, this is a team for me, Payne. If things start to go south, they can go sideways in a hurry, and if these stories are starting to circulate now before the season starts, you begin to wonder exactly what that locker room dynamic looks like. But again, all speculation, knowing that they have the talent, especially at the skill spots. We'll see if the health along the offensive line holds up, and if this team can get to 10 wins that it'll require to exceed odds makers' expectations. Now,
There's 2 things here to kind of talk about the speculation, and we're not a hot take podcast, and we don't really dive into the speculation, but the understanding was Jordan Addison preferred Texas because his wide receivers coach from Pittsburgh went there. The only reason he ended up going to USC was the NIL deal. And so when that isn't as plentiful as it appears was initially pitched, he's a little upset. The other thing here that we had heard at Oklahoma was Lincoln Riley runs a pretty loose ship off the field and in the locker room. So there is potential for that to be a little bit of a mess, and it's kind of why Todd and I danced around players meshing and all of those things rather than kind of just abruptly saying those things because they might not materialize.
Well, and
all of a sudden you have egg on your face. But those were some rumors within the industry.
Well, and the other thing, too, that I've heard as well, and not necessarily fully substantiated feedback, that USC, despite what they're projecting to the outside world, doesn't exactly have their NIL collective fully in check just yet. And if Jordan Addison is the tip of the iceberg, you do wonder how this can manifest itself throughout the rest of the program. But, of course, on-field results can be the ultimate deodorant and mask any other deficiencies that could exist there. But for all the optimism about USC offensively, we obviously have some real questions about what this team is going to look like on the defensive side of the ball. USC surrendered more than 31 points per game last year, the highest average in the program's proud history. In comes Alex Grinch to undertake a massive rebuild on the stop unit after new lows were reached last year. A lot of brand new faces, learning an entirely new scheme. But the one thing, Payne, we can talk about some of the players and personnel. This defense is going to probably get tested a lot sooner than USC fans would like to admit when you're talking about weeks 3 and 4 taking on a team in Fresno State that has an NFL caliber quarterback potentially in Jay Kaner and going up to Corvallis in late September to take on an underrated Beavers offense, even if they have 2 essential tune-ups out of the gates against Rice and Stanford.
You're spot on. And, we really like Alex Grinch. We've talked about him over the years, and he's back in the Pac-12, and he worked wonders at Washington State when he inherited a defense that was 97th in schedule-adjusted efficiency, and 3 years later it was a top 30 unit. We saw a similar trajectory at Oklahoma where Grinch took over a defense that was outside the top 80, and in 2 seasons Oklahoma was 15th. Now, there was regression last season, but Grinch left the defense better than when he got there. That is not debatable. Now, USC's defense won't be good this season, I don't think. But it's likely the Trojans are better than their public projections in the mid-80s that I'm seeing. Their best lineman in Tua Paluto is back, solid against the run, got to the quarterback as well. Brandon Peely returns after missing last season with an injury. If he can play the run as well as he did in 2019, that would help. Nick Figueroa has been a plus defender back-to-back seasons. Corey Foreman, the uber-talented D-end and number 2 overall recruit in 2021, looks solid. Now, he didn't get much work done this offseason with what he called a minor knee dislocation. I don't know if those things can be minor, but hey, he played in the spring game with a monster knee brace on. It would be nice if he could reach his potential. His eyes did light up in an interview I watched when he was asked about working with Sean Nua, USC's new D-line coach and the man responsible for helping Aiden Hutchinson. Romello Height, the Auburn transfer, has apparently been one of the standouts this offseason. I don't know if that's good or bad when he couldn't really get on the field for Auburn and he's suddenly the guy making noise for you in the offseason. We'll figure that out. USC did win a huge battle for Arizona State transfer linebacker Eric Gentry. He's a 4-star kid. Shane Lee, an all-SEC freshman, transfers in from Alabama. He's been solid by all accounts, but couldn't get on the field last year for Alabama. USC didn't take many high school kids in this class either. They did land Damani Jackson, the number 2 corner in 2022. He should get some burn right away if he's fully healthy and confident after tearing his knee senior season in high school. I have to be honest. I'm higher on some of the transfers in the secondary that USC brought in than other people. Latrell McCutcheon, a 4-star freshman last season, followed Alex Grinch over from Oklahoma. He had a plus season. Mekhi Blackman, the Colorado transfer, is coming off back-to-back plus seasons. Bryson Shaw was a 600-plus snap starter for Ohio State at safety last season and graded out extremely well. And if all these guys can stay confident and realize their toughest challenge each week will come in practice defending Mario Williams and Jordan Addison, games might be easier. Again, this isn't an elite defense or maybe even a good defense, but it's absolutely a defense in my mind better than where public projections have them. And I will say this. You made an interesting point to me over text a couple days ago, Todd. If offenses are smart, because of this lack of depth, they're going tempo, try to wear USC out, take advantage of them late in games. Maybe that is something we see and is ultimately their downfall. But there are some players here with pedigree that are all kind of trending potentially in the right direction. And I just like Alex Grinch. We've seen what he's done with shit talent at Washington State. And produced based upon his scheme, there are better players here talent-wise than he had at Washington State, clearly.
Oh, I agree. And I think what's always interesting for a coordinator like Grinch, sometimes you can get lesser talent to buy into your scheme. You're able to sell them a vision that the sum total is better than any of the individual parts here at SC, and why I think it's almost a fascinating exploration in terms of what the transfer portal will look like or a full rebuild. This feels like an NFL roster where you're bringing in a ton of free agents that are expected to perform at a high level, learning a new system, and hit the ground running without any of that fine tuning. So you don't have that continuity, and sometimes that can work in your favor when you're trying to instill a new culture, and at the same time it can also work against you if you have one piece that doesn't necessarily sign in, given the fact that a lot of these guys that you referenced were all high recruits that were expected to contribute to previous programs but are looking for a fresh start.
I agree with that. And ultimately all I'm saying here is some of the public projections have USC as the 85th best defense. I would buy on them being better than that. But to your point, if a couple injuries occur, they're super thin. If teams smartly go helter-skelter and wear them down late in games, that's the smart approach. But I do think as we kind of use this baseline, I think they can be better than what public projections are suggesting right now.
And if USC is going to get to the top of the mountain in the Pac-12, they're going to have to knock off the defending conference champion, and that, of course, would be the Utah Utes, who find themselves as 3-1 shots to win the conference title for the second consecutive year, a far cry from a team that went off as high as 10 or 11-1 if you shopped around a season ago. Kyle Whittingham's bunch's win total, 8.5, lay $1.40 to go over the total at FanDuel Sportsbook. And I'll start their breakdown with what I felt was a very interesting quote from Kyle Whittingham, who we know who has essentially become the dean of coaches, especially in the Pac-12. He said, "I've always been a huge believer that it's harder to stay on top than to get to the top. That's something that I don't know if excited is the word, but we're focused on sustaining success. That's where we're at," Whittingham said. "Everybody is a moving target. Nobody is standing still." And Utah finally reached the ascent of a Power 5 conference with that elusive conference championship. Utah returned 17 total starters this season, 17 or 18 depending on who you go by. Looks like 8 on offense, 6 on defense, and all 3 specialists, highlighted by all conference players, including redshirt junior quarterback Cam Rising, who really sparked Utah's season last year. And they're trying to become just the 3rd Pac-12 program ever to make the college football playoff. Payne, I texted you on the side and said this is a team that I think a lot of people truly believe in this year, but I feel like the market is providing an accurate reflection of what Utah's ceiling can be. And for me, maybe a little bit of skepticism about everything that they were able to accomplish a season ago. And I'm not sure this is a program that's able to plug and chug some of the defensive difference makers they won't have at their disposal in 2022.
So this is always the tough debate that we have, and some of it's external noise. The win total at 8.5 over $1.40 doesn't really depict someone that's getting a lot of hype in the market. And I think what we see is there are situations where social media maybe influences us a little bit. And I understand the gentleman who released his preview magazine, and it's a solid preview magazine. But I think a lot of Twitter doesn't really love him because the, 8,000-pound elephant in the room is that he sells information and has for years, and he's not very good at that side of things. And so all of the bettors kind of come out and swarm. And so when Phil Steele says, hey, I think Utah can make a college football playoff run, that's where the disdain comes from. But when you kind of take a step back and process and you're like, oh, the win total's like 8.7, like this really isn't all of that difficult to achieve, is kind of where I'm at here. And I really want to start with the offense because immediately it provides one of the larger talking points. We had to adjust and then extrapolate priors to only include Cam Rising snaps since he didn't play until late in week 3 and got his first start in week 4. When we made that manual adjustment to Utah's offense, it became a fringe top 7 unit last year. And knowing offense equates to winning, we're higher on Utah than current market because of that manual adjustment to Utah's priors. Getting into Cam Rising, the reason for the adjustment is pretty clear. He is a leader. He's accurate. He can run the offense efficiently by getting the ball out in time, and he knows where it needs to go. Now, he doesn't have the strongest arm. He can't make all the throws. You see that with your eyes and in the metrics when Rising tries throwing right, intermediate to deep. But he takes care of the football. Guys look to him in clutch situations. He increased the level of play of everyone around him. And when things got tough on third down or in big drives last season, Cam Rising was fantastic situationally. 5 of his top 6 pass catchers return. Mekhi Cope, the redshirt freshman, has been all the rave. If you watch the spring game, my God. One-handed catches in the rain. He proved he could beat man coverage on the outside. Also, you have arguably one of the West Coast's best tight end duos in Keefe and Kincaid. Rare a tight end can do what Keefe does in the pass game. 2.3 yards per route run. That was top 5 in the country from the tight end position. Expect him to line up a little bit more in the slot this year is what I'm hearing. Tavion Thomas is back, and once he solved the fumbling issues, his production skyrocketed. Thomas led all P5 backs in rushing touchdowns. He was second in broken tackles per rush and number 1 in explosive runs in the Pac-12. You also have the freshman from Florida, Jalen Glover. He is going to have a role as well. He feels like Zach Moss 2.0 in the making. Florida and Florida State passed on Glover because he didn't have the top end speed, but Utah kind of turned up the heat and ultimately landed Glover, who I do like. O-line returns 3 of 5 starters from a unit that finished top 20 in line yards, opportunity rate, and sack rate allowed. Utah finished the season number 1 in EPA per rush. That's really something considering how poor Utah's offensive line was the first month of the season. So something else to factor in with your priors. The 2 linemen that moved on were both undrafted free agents. To me, Braden Daniels looks like the left tackle starter, and he's graded out better than Olseleni, the man who he's replacing. Nick Ford gets talked about a lot. Certainly a great guy in the program, was super versatile, but production-wise doesn't seem irreplaceable. I don't think the O-line production dips as much as others. Falcon has been a standout in camp. Jaron Kump comes back. Lots of love returning from an ACL tear in October. Whittingham believes he has 10 guys up front with starting ability. And we've talked about this unit the last couple of years, and you could see all of the young talent it was bringing in. I think it comes together this year. 2 elements also that indicate there could be some meat left on the bone for Utah's offense this season. The Utes finished top 5 in quality possession rate, but they were outside the top 40 in points per quality possession, outside the top 50 in finishing drives. That's bizarre when you think about an offense that efficient running the ball to have that kind of dichotomy. Then I look at our projections. Utah will face defenses with an average projected efficiency rank of 70th, Todd. Aside from San Diego State, there's no one on this schedule defensively that's like, oh my God, this is difficult. Sure, you get Florida out of the gate in the swamp. That's going to be a difficult matchup, but all the rumor is for an SEC team, they have 1 defensive tackle that's of an SEC caliber. When you think about a physical team that likes to run the ball right at you, might be a matchup edge in that game. Arizona State, a lot of the projections have them as like a top 30 defense. There is potential for the wheels to fall right off that damn thing. Aside from those teams, right? Like, who defensively is good here? Nobody. And so I think this offense does have an ability to repeat last year's performance, even without Britton Covey.
No, it's definitely an interesting group. There is no doubt about it. And Cam Rising, I've even seen him getting a little bit of buzz as a dark horse Heisman contender. I'm not quite sure I'm willing to ascribe to that school of thought, knowing that Kyle Whittingham wants to lean on the ground attack. But clearly we saw Utah's offense on full display, coming up just short in the Rose Bowl, albeit against an undermanned Ohio State team. And they looked up for the challenge. So to your point, they don't exactly face a daunting schedule of opposing defenses, and we'll see what they can do on that side of the ball. Now, from a defensive standpoint, Morgan Scaley has kind of been the architect behind everything that this group has done. It's been plug and play along the defensive line for so many years, and the Utes clearly feel comfortable with some of the depth that they've cultivated in that group. They believe they have a young star in sophomore ends Van Fillinger and Jonah Ellis as guys that can potentially take them to the next level. I referenced it at the top, what this linebacking core will look like. And when you lose a guy in Devin Lloyd, it's not like Alabama or Georgia that can just plug in first-round draft picks. They also lose Nafai Sewell, who projects to be a number 1 position player for, Sewell and I'm looking at my notes trying to make heads or tails. So trying to figure out exactly where this group will go. But they bring in a Florida transfer, and you talked about a guy that you liked, and we were texting a little bit about this team, and Mohamed Diabate. As far as Utah is concerned defensively, how big a fall off can we expect, or is there more noise than the actual drop off that we anticipate?
Listen, Utah loses its clear top two in both leadership and production with Devin Lloyd and Tafua. Vontae Davis moved on as well. In totality, right, the Utes are outside the top 80 in returning defensive production. But it does feel like Whittingham, and you mentioned the defensive coordinator, Morgan Scully, just have a feel for the players they want that fit the Utah mold. And that's why there's rarely a massive drop-off in transition years for them. It's not a complex defense to pick up. Utah wants to be more physical than you at the point of attack, and they recruit those kinds of kids, and they want to play man on the outside. That's just who Utah is, and that's worked well in a little softer Pac-12. I do like some of the starting pieces Utah has, though. Junior Tafuna, one freshman of the year in the Pac-12 defensively. Van Fillinger looks poised for a breakout season. You mentioned Mohamed Diabate, the 4-star linebacker transfer in from Florida. The highest-rated recruit of the 2022 class, Lander Barton, likely starts day one alongside Diabate. That should help offset the loss of all-world Devin Lloyd. You know, like when you look at Lander Barton, everyone in the world wanted him. He was a fringe top 5 guy, 5-star guy. So does he step in day one? It's very possible. The secondary saw 2 youngsters emerge as the season went on last year with Cole Bishop and Clark Phillips becoming starters. Phillips is the highest-rated recruit in Utah history. The final 6 games, he allowed less than half a yard per coverage snap. He has a chance to be the best corner in the Pac-12. Starting corner Jatavius Brunton got injured after 2 games last season. He's back. Past the players, though, the more valuable conversation is the one similar to Utah's offense. I think it's smart to tweak your priors by downweighting the Rose Bowl game for Utah's defense. Utah was beaten and battered on defense heading into that game, specifically in the secondary. Had one starting cornerback available against Ryan Day, C.J. Stroud, and that Ohio State trio of receivers. Utah was forced to move a freshman running back, Micah Bernard, to corner. That's how beat up they were. So if you chart Utah's defense, they were 14th in schedule-adjusted efficiency heading into the Rose Bowl. After giving up 48 to the best offense in the country, a caliber of offense Utah simply won't face this season, Utah dipped to a fringe top 25 schedule-adjusted defense, dipped nearly 10 spots off one performance. So we elected to downweight that sample in our priors, and it led to a future projection heading into the season we felt was a little bit more accurate. Schedule-wise, there appears to be a handful of good offenses. Florida out of the chute, UCLA, USC, and Oregon, 4 very likely top 25 offenses if Florida can find someone to catch a football. Oregon State might be able to flirt with that ballpark too, but there's quite the dichotomy with 5 games against teams we project to have an average offensive efficiency rank of 22nd, and then the other 7 games, it's 97th overall. Based on our current power ratings, Utah has a 51% chance or greater to win every game. Toss up at Oregon, right now 2-point favorite at Florida open the season. Every other game on the schedule, including at UCLA and hosting USC, we give Utah more than a 61% chance of winning, Todd.
Hey, I mean, this is a program that we've talked about for years being a sleeping giant. It was always a question of could they lure skill position talents into their league? And while I don't ever like to really make the comparison, I almost feel like Utah and their trajectory within the Pac-12 is very similar to what we saw Stanford years ago, where Stanford played a bully ball style. They were more physically imposing than a lot of their conference mates, and it paid dividends when you could wear them down, especially late in the year. And to Utah's credit, this was a season last year that could have very easily gotten off the rails after a slow start. When you lose to San Diego State in overtime, you lose the Holy War against BYU, but the Utes got things on track and were able to win that first conference championship in program history as members of the Pac-12. You talked a little bit about one of the top offenses that Utah is going to face this season. That would be the UCLA Bruins. And when we look at UCLA, Chip Kelly's team 10-1 underdogs to come out of the Pac-12 as conference champions. Their win total 8.5 flat at this point. A lot of their win total attributed to arguably one of the softest non-conference schedules that you could possibly put together for a team hailing from a Power 5 conference. But there is reason for optimism in Westwood, as UCLA will bring back a starting quarterback in Dorian Thompson-Robinson, who we make this joke all the time, really has felt like he's been on campus for 37 years. It's actually entering his 5th season as a member of the program. Did throw for 20 touchdowns and ran the ball very effectively last year. Felt like some of the poor decision making that plagued him through his first couple of seasons wasn't as apparent when you watch the Bruins game to game. They bring back a talented running back in Zach Charbonnet, who's going to be the horse. His rushing total last year was the most at UCLA since 2015 and possesses a powerful downhill running style. As far as pass catchers are concerned, this is an area where UCLA has some concerns offensively. It's going to look a lot different without the likes of Kyle Phillips and Greg Dulcich that's out there. Some reason for optimism along the offensive line as well. But when you look at what Chip Kelly is building with this UCLA Bruins team, where are they going to be able to realize new heights in their final couple of seasons as members of the Pac-12?
New heights? Maybe. I think last year was probably the potential for their peak, especially with USC and, heading to the Big Ten. I don't know. I think there was some speculation that Chip was on the hot seat last year and they gave him, a rinky-dink extension this year. So we'll see. But a lot went right for Chip Kelly's offense last year. Had one of the best run-blocking offensive lines. That really led the way. Top 15 in line yards, opportunity rate, and stuff rate allowed. Zach Charbonnet had more juice than I think anyone thought coming over from Michigan. He forced 69 missed tackles on 204 attempts, and UCLA ended up with a top 10 run game in terms of EPA. But the biggest difference to me, and it took Chip Kelly's offense from fringe top 30 in 2020 to fringe top 10 in 2021, was the leap that DTR made. His adjusted accuracy eclipsed 77% when he was kept clean. That was a personal best since being at UCLA. He stopped forcing balls into coverage. You could see, just kind of watching it, and you could see it in the numbers, that he was taking better care of the football. For the first time in DTR's career, had more touchdown passes than turnover-worthy play rate. It actually doubled. With as good as UCLA's ground game was, Chip dialed up a ton of play action. 32% of DTR's dropbacks were using play action. And boy, he was elite throwing with play action. Among quarterbacks with at least 300 dropbacks, DTR's 10% completion rate increase and his 12.2 yards per attempt using play action was top 7 among all college quarterbacks. And we know the run threat he is, right? But as I look at it, he's going to have to make another leap this year because I don't know if the parts around him are as good. So his game has to hit even a new height. UCLA lost its O-line coach, Justin Fry, who moved on to Ohio State, and its top 3 guys in Gratton Jr., Ryan, and Anderson. That's both starting tackles and a guard. That trio played almost 2,300 snaps last season of elite ball. UCLA does get Marazzo back from injury along with Gaines and Clemens. That's likely the interior of the line, and then UCLA will figure out the tackle position between Raekwon O'Neal, the fringe 4-star transfer from Rutgers, who I have heard a lot of teams passed on that needed a tackle. They don't think he's as good as that rating. Jalen Jeffers, the Oregon transfer, and Garrett Diagiorno and Josh Carlin, who manned the tackle position in spring, all those guys are fighting for a right tackle spot, keeping a close eye on that to see how things shake out during fall camp. So some turnover at a key spot for UCLA there. Finding reliable pass catchers is going to be interesting, to your point. Between Kyle Phillips and Greg Dulcich, 2 guys that were drafted in April, UCLA is replacing more than 49% of its receptions, 54% of its receiving yards, and 65% of its receiving touchdowns between just those 2 guys. Jake Bobo transfers in from Duke, big body, 6'5" guy. I think he's a nice security blanket for DTR. Casimir Allen's back. He averaged 2.4 yards per route run last season. It would be nice if that number can translate again in an expanded role. Very short sample last year. Most UCLA insiders think Cam Brown could make the leap and be the best receiver on the team. The former 4-star receiver from Hawaii transfers in from UCF. His name's Titus. I will not pronounce his last name. And there's been a ton of buzz around.
Come on, give it a shot to pronounce the name. Let's go.
No. For the sake of his family. Right, then you have your freshman, Jaden Marshall, top 200 guy. all of the hype is that he is going to take on the DeAnthony Thomas role from Chip's old days at Oregon's. Now, I look at the schedule and how it shakes out. UCLA has 4 games to get the O-line and receiver group figured out before hosting Washington. Both Utah and USC are home games with a bye before Oregon. We have UCLA, just a dog to Utah and at Oregon, a pick'em hosting USC as it stands right now. The remaining 9 games, UCLA will be favored in. From an offensive perspective, the 11 FBS teams UCLA will face have an average projected defensive efficiency rank of 62nd. Alabama State is one of the worst teams on earth. Schedule is very manageable with how it sets up. Although, you beat USC, you do have that short week trip at Cal, which could be interesting from a betting perspective at the end of the season.
Yeah, I'm not sure what to expect at Cal. Not a team that'll crack our breakdowns here. We know we've been big believers in Justin Wilcox, but if UCLA is able to knock off USC and put together a pretty impressive season, it will be fascinating to see what they run back Thanksgiving week for that game against the Golden Bears. So if there are questions about UCLA at a lot of spots, and namely not the quarterback position with Dorian Thompson-Robinson, defensively, this team needs a little bit of an overhaul. So Bill McGovern steps in, a friendly face with an NFL background as defensive coordinator, and a change that I think will be a welcome breath of fresh air for a group that got gashed when it came to rushing touchdowns last season, and it was a group that was second to last against the pass within the league. There aren't a lot of starters, but there is a good amount of experience with all sorts of transfers being expected to play potential big-time roles for what UCLA will bring to the table. When you begin to assess where the Bruins are as far as a stop unit, do you have reason for optimism that they can rectify the wrongs of things that went awry last season?
I'm not really sure. You bring in a new DC and Bill McGovern. His specialty is defensive backs and linebackers. He was on Chip Kelly's Eagles staff from 2013 to 2015. I'm just not sure how much different things are going to look since Azzarano was also on the same Eagles staff with Chip and McGovern. So philosophy is probably pretty similar. Prior to McGovern getting the DC job at UCLA, his last DC job was all the way back from 2009 to 2012 at Boston College. He inherited a defense that finished 4th the year before he hopped over there. And by his final season in 2012, BC was 63rd in schedule-adjusted defensive efficiency. Candidly, I don't know enough about him other than McGovern likes to send heat and blitz, but, I don't know. I don't really get the vibe that this is a massive upgrade, and I don't really get the vibe that UCLA is spending a ton on football right now. That's just kind of what I'm hearing. What I do know is UCLA is outside the top 100 in returning defensive production. Jim Leonard, an elite defensive mind, nabbed Jay Shaw, one of the best cover corners in the Pac-12. That's how good Jim Leonard is, right? He can steal a kid from Corona, California, and convince him Wisconsin's fun. Shaw is really elite. You look at him, gave up a 47% reception rate when targeted and had 3 picks. Mitchell Aguda, a really promising defensive end, got plucked by Mario in Miami. UCLA did hit the portal hard to try to offset some of those losses. Inked 4 key cogs with the Murphy brothers from North Texas, Azizi Hearn from Wyoming, and Darius Muasu from Hawaii. Each are coming from non-Power 5 conferences, but they did finish top 10 in value over replacement at their respective positions. Will it translate to a Power 5 conference with this many good offenses? That's the big question. The answer likely determines whether UCLA can actually fight to win the South or just kind of play third wheel. But past the transfers, there's not many dudes on this side of the ball. It just, to me, doesn't feel like a ton of improvement is going to happen when I look at the system and I look at the talent. UCLA doesn't really recruit defense at a level that can be all that competitive in a competent offensive conference. But what you're hoping for is maybe a different voice helps some of the situational defense. I mean, talent rules, but you can be functional if you're studied and you're gap sound and you pay attention to detail. But the Bruins defense was kind of sacked with poor starting field position last season. They were outside the top 120 in getting off the field on 3rd and 4th down. When teams penetrated their green zone, they were barely inside the top 90 in finishing drive defense. So just situationally bad. We're put in some bad spots. Now you look at the schedule, and that's probably the saving grace. UCLA's defense won't really be able to compete when it steps up in weight class against Utah, Oregon, and USC, barring, injuries or horrific weather in those games. But the 9 other offenses on the schedule that UCLA plays, not one projected inside our top 60. Again, Alabama State is an absolute dreg, and the 8 other FBS offenses have an average projected efficiency rank of 89th. That number signals to me UCLA will have about 2/3 of its fights, so to speak, in its own weight class. And that at least gives them a fighting chance to maybe be below average.
I mean, this is a UCLA program in general that I think you kind of hinted at that finds itself in a position of peril, figuring out what kind of commitment they're going to make. They finally had a winning season last year, going 8-4. But for the most part, I think a lot of UCLA Bruins fans, the 12 of them that actually exist that live and die with their football program, wanted Chip Kelly to take them to another level, compete for conference championships. And that road will only get to be more of an uphill battle when you begin to change zip codes and you're matching body for body against Big Ten foes in a much more physically strenuous, rigorous, whatever kind of schedule you want to call it, beginning potentially as early as 2025. So let's see what UCLA can do if they're able to put together a strong season in the wake of the 8-4 that we saw from them a season ago.
Here's the vibe on Chip Kelly and UCLA, by the way. My understanding is that Chip has stopped putting a ton of time and effort into certain level recruits because he simply doesn't think he can land them. And so they've gone to this evaluation phase where they're going to try and enhance their evaluation department and find 3-star kids that they believe should be 4-star kids and mesh with their systems. There's also this idea, and it's probably true to an extent, that when he was running roughshod over the Pac-12 at Oregon, his offense was innovative, and now a lot of teams do it, so defenses are prepared for it. So those are kind of the uphill battles here that UCLA is facing. Maybe moving to the Big Ten, taking the paycheck, helps them compete a little bit in the NIL game. We'll see what ultimately transpires there. Now, I will say this. There is one team on here in the Pac-12 that we neglected that you absolutely love. So do me a favor and elevator pitch me on the Oregon State Beavers.
I'm going to try my best. You know me. I got my man crush on Jonathan Smith out there in Corvallis and turning around an Oregon State program that was more or less an afterthought with Mike Riley making his 3rd stint there. But they finally got over the hump last season, went 7-6 after a 2-5, COVID-shortened season. There's a lot of reason to believe that Smith spurned other more prestigious offers to try and continue to rebuild the resurrection project that is Oregon State football. And when you look at the Beavers, they're obviously 41-1 long shots at FanDuel Sportsbook to win the Pac-12. Their win total sits at 5.5. You have to lay a $1.80 if you want to go over that total. And what I think is interesting, when you dig into some of the comments, Jonathan Smith, and I'm paraphrasing one of his quotes, this place has completely been overhauled from top to bottom. He's been fortunate enough to see it all from the beginning, to be a part of it, change the culture from the way their locker room operates to the way they go through practice, the focus, the team lifting, camaraderie, everything else that they're doing here. Now, when you look at Oregon State, I'm not going to sit here and sound off like Chance Nolan is even the second coming of Derek Anderson and capable of playing at the next level. They have what should be an interesting quarterback battle between Tristan Gebbia and Ben Gulbranson, guys that bring in different skill sets, but you have to believe Nolan can be the guy. It's not rinse and repeat when you lose a player of the ilk of B.J. Baylor, who was outstanding running the football, especially going downhill. Deshaun Fenwick and Damian Martinez, those two appear to be the guys that are going to have a chance to win the starting job. And as far as the receiving room is concerned, Trevon Bradford had been the stalwart and the reliable go-to threat, so they'll look for Silas Bolden to kind of enter the rotation after a healthy spring, hoping he can be a guy that can add alongside Harrison Lindsey and Gould. Now, the one thing I do like most about Oregon State, especially on the offensive line, Payne, they generated a ton of push last season. They allowed the Beavers to run for an average of 2.7 yards before contact, a figure that actually led the Pac-12 and ranked top 10 in the FBS in such a metric. And if OSU can reload its running game, and with an offensive line group that can pave the way, there's a lot of reason for optimism on that particular front. Now, as far as this team and what they bring defensively, hey, look, it's not the same caliber of athletes as any team in the upper echelon. It's more about getting guys to buy in and trying to coach them up. You talked about the talent evaluations that we've seen at UCLA, knowing the weight class that they have to punch in and trying to get those players to reach their ceilings. I think Oregon State kind of falls in that same general vicinity when you're talking about a Beavers program that tallied only 20 sacks last season, ranked him outside the top 100 in the FBS, and maybe worse off, they were only able to get to opposing quarterbacks on less than 4.5% of dropbacks. That ranked them 118th. When you look at the Beavers defensively, middling mark in the Pac-12, 26 points per game. There are pieces to like, but there's not a lot of NFL caliber talent. This is a team I think that's more interesting to watch on a week-to-week basis. And in my opinion, we're going to get a great illustration of where Oregon State is as a program in 2 games against Mountain West opponents right out of the gates, when they'll host Boise State, is slightly more than a field goal favorite in their opener, and then they'll travel to Fresno State on September 10th. So this is a team I think you'll be able to make some money betting them over the total on a week-in, week-out basis, but clearly not a group that I'm going to advocate for in winning the conference at a long shot price of 40-1.
Sharp guys agree with your sentiment, and earlier this offseason went over 5.5 wins. It's pretty much painted 6.5 right now, but there are a couple straggling 5.5s out there, minus 145. So something to think about there. We didn't really touch on some of, I don't want to call them dregs because they used to be some good schools in the Pac-12. But the other one that stood out, obviously, is Arizona State. They took massive money under, did open under 7.5, minus 55 some places. It's now down to 5.5. There has been some sharp money pointing toward the Colorado under as well. So some of the other schools within the Pac-12 before we get to our best bet, Todd.
Yeah, and I think, when you mention Arizona State, I don't want to ignore their rival in the Territorial Cup, a program that has probably been the most downtrodden in the entire Pac-12 over the last couple of seasons. But if I'm being honest, Payne, and we look at a lot of these college programs as stocks, do you buy on a week-in, week-out basis? Do you buy for the long term? I'd be much more apt to buy into what Coach Fish is doing, raising the overall recruiting profile down in Tucson compared to the dumpster fire in Tempe. And there's no reason that Arizona State shouldn't be better than what they are. And we'll see if Arizona can try and restore some semblance of being competitive on a weekly basis to what Mike Stoops had. I'm not going to say they're going to be a top 5 program like the Desert Swarm defenses in the late 90s, but I do like the way Arizona is trending. And I really believe they're a team that can jump up and bite somebody if you don't bring your lunch pail deep into the heart of Pac-12 conference play.
They do have some talent, and I think ultimately Arizona State, just as a team, we were selling in general, right? They lost a ton of talent. There's some internal issues that are going on. I do not know how Herm Edwards still has a job, and that might not be the case at some point in the middle of this season. Stunning to me. But this is about keeping good relationships in media, apparently, because if it was anybody else who didn't spend a decade in the media, I would guess Herm Edwards is out of a job by now.
Yeah, it's so bizarre. I mean, I won't claim to know the inner workings of the athletic department at Arizona State, but it always feels to me like they should be the sleeping giant. Like, let's not sugarcoat it. There are no academic standards in terms of bringing in talent down there in Tempe, but the football program has been an afterthought consistently. The basketball program, we thought Bobby Hurley could be the guy, and you saw flashes of what could go on there. We saw them pump in money into taking their, college hockey program away from club level status, built them a beautiful on-campus facility, and we'll see what that can realize. And when you talk about recruiting, for anybody that's ever set foot in Tempe or walked down Mill Ave in October and November, it should be one of the easiest places to recruit 18 to 22-year-old men to play a college sport, and Arizona State just hasn't been able to get there. You wonder how long a leash Herm Edwards really has, or maybe the athletic administration is just waiting for the NCAA to hand down its rulings on some of the allegations of impropriety as far as recruiting is concerned, and then they'll make a decision if Herm is going to continue to steer the ship or they'll go in a completely different direction. Because I never believed, Payne, when Herm came in, that things could get worse than what they were under Todd Graham's leadership.
So as to why the talent might not be producing, it's quite simple. Women weakened legs. And as for Herm and the ship, I'm just visually thinking of a gif where the Titanic's going down and he's just shoving staff members overboard. And just that's what's transpired here.
Yeah, he has definitely not been shy.
The good guy, Herm Edwards, that everybody loves, is not what you think he is.
Yeah, he's definitely not been shy about throwing guys in front of the bus to get them chewed up and spit out as a result. So Arizona State, a team, to your point, that took massive amounts of money under the total, and a team that appears to be fracturing at the seams. We'll see if Florida transfer Emory Jones can be the difference maker there. But there you have it. 7 relevant teams as far as the Pac-12 is concerned, with a little bonus breakdown of my beloved Oregon State Beavers. But Payne, before we get out of Dodge and put a bow on the Pac-12, we do have one final order of business to transact. But before I even let you get there, again, use the promo code BetTheBoard. Go to FanDuel.com. A no sweat bet up to $1,000. It's perfect for any win totals or anything else you want to bet on FanDuel's extensive betting menu. And now, my friend, the floor is officially yours.
I'm going to be quick because we already broke this team down. We are going over 8.5 minus $1.40 at FanDuel on the Utah Utes. If you want to hear any more of the breakdown, there's about 15 minutes of it. It'll be time-stamped above. But going over 8.5 minus 40 for a team that we have favored in every single game is really interesting to me. There's very few times you're going to have that ability. And I know, again, perception might be a little bit different when you hear public folks talking about making a college football playoff run. I don't necessarily believe that to be the case. We just have to get 9 wins here. And it's shocking that you have that ability. It's at FanDuel, as Todd alluded to, the link in the description. Click that, sign up, bet Utah over 8.5.
Second straight year, we go back to Salt Lake City for a best bet in the Pac-12 with Utah over their win total. We'll remind all of you, follow Payne on Twitter at Payne Insider. I'm Todd Furman. You can follow me there. Most importantly, follow the podcast at Bet the Board Pod. And if you haven't already done so, tune in to Bet the Board's first foray into NASCAR with the Stay Green podcast. Payne always encourages you to find alternative investment strategies, and we've offered up some great matchups and some outrights for you guys to take advantage of, especially as you try and get through the dog days of summer leading up to college football in early September. We'll be right back here with you next week. Dates to be disclosed as far as the SEC breakdown. We'll take a little bit of a sabbatical, and we'll come back firing with 8 division previews for the National Football League. So best of luck with all of your Pac-12 endeavors, and with the Utah over 8.5 ticket in hand, we'll call it early November. We'll see you at the window.
Thanks for listening to Bet the Board. You can catch Todd and Payne every Monday, Wednesday, and Thursday during football season, breaking down the biggest NFL and college football games. And to make sure you don't miss any free best bets, subscribe to Bet the Board on iTunes, Google Play, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.